Social Repose is back, and let me play this clip.
So with all the stuff between Social Repose and Ronnie Radke going on, I thought I should do my story time on how Richie Geese, aka Social Repose, tried to talk to me when I was 15. So I was 15, about to be 16. I turned 16 in November 19th. I'm 23 now, by the way, but he said, please don't say you're 16. Are you 15? Let me down easy. Then I said, close to 16. My birthday is on November 19th. He said, I feel less bad. Who says that? What 25-year-old says that? I'm 23 now, and I could not imagine trying to talk to a fucking 15 or 16-year-old. Disgusting. Then he proceeds to tell me, you're so cute though, stop being 16. What the fuck? Like, what the actual fuck? I'm sorry, I look terrible right now, but all in all, he's a fucking predator. I don't give a fuck. That's just the facts. And I will screen record the messages and his profile if you guys need further proof. But I seen other people were commenting on Ronnie's videos saying that he's a predator, blah, 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 talks to underage girls. So there's the proof. This was in 2014/15. Like I said, I'm 23 now. It's 2022. That's absolutely disgusting, and people need to watch out for people like him.
This allegation is a huge one, and we'll get into that. We're working our way backwards, as well as my last few months following this man, uncovering other various things about him and Social Repose as a person. Exploring this allegation, the past relationships, and general issues I have with Social Repose. Then I had stopped at one point and was just roped back in, and this has continued on for a couple of months. Regardless, according to this woman, Carla, Richie allegedly chatted up and flirted with her when she was a teenager. This has been alleged about Social Repose forever, primarily from the internet at large, with unsubstantiated testimony from people who used to be in his life. Basically, it was something no one had any evidence of. People throw around certain words and I'm not going to, but I covered Social Repose 2 years ago, and he's been my biggest story. That's not even an understatement, he really has. I compared him to Onision, but I didn't elaborate on that. I know this will be a point of contention in my reporting now, but my opinion on the matter is simply this. Having covered both Social Repose and Onision, I believe they're both self-destructive narcissists. This is my opinion, I'm an unprofessional. Having spoken to both of them, this is just my feeler on the situation. Onision and him have a lot in common. However, I understand that those aren't literal comparisons between the two of exact standards. Moving back to this allegation, it was the spark that reignited my investigation. Unknown to all of you, I had received these messages months ago regarding Social Repose, while I was researching spirit science. Richie had become a bit of a pet project for me. I dropped it in January to February, only to be roped back in with all these Richie throwing pot shots on TikTok, as well as all the audience members he has on there and haters.
Carla's story came out during one of these spats where Ronnie Radke of Falling in Reverse fame
was taking Social Repose to task for many things. Their argument isn't important really. Ronnie Radke has definitely perked up some ears, and I'll get to that. He's definitely a part of this wonderful rogues gallery of emo celebrities. But Ronnie Radke is a story for another day. Point is, he was using things like this to take the high road against Social Repose, and had responded to Carla and various other women who told their stories. So I got in contact with Carla, told her I was sorry about all this happening and how crazy it was, and gave her the rundown on what I tell my sources and what's gonna happen next. That I'd take my time, ask some tough questions about this, and tell the story. Meanwhile, others would speak out against Richie, and some things had changed. For example, this girl, Caitlin, tells a story about how spending time with Social Repose, he'd just be complaining about other people who would wrong him and spilling the tea, basically. Social Repose was just gossiping about people he used to be friends with.
So, super fun fact, my ex-best friend fucked Social Repose when she was 19 and he was 30. And one day we went to go get Dutch Bros and he was in the car with us. And I was like, tell me some secrets. I'm a little bit interested, I'm curious. And the only thing he told us was his beef between him and Ronnie. He nonstop talked about how Ronnie did him dirty or whatever. But he just kept making like such a big deal about like him and Ronnie beefing and how like something happened at Warped Tour. I don't know, this happened like 3 years ago. I don't remember much. But like it was maybe like an hour car ride and 90% of it was him just talking shit about Ronnie. So I'd like to think that Social Repose Richard, is a little obsessed with Ronnie. There was also another time where I was at his house and we called one of our friends and he like got all weird because he didn't want us FaceTiming in his house because of like privacy reasons, even though we were just like FaceTiming like this. I can post a whole other story time about that if y'all want. But yeah, he was just talking about like his insider secrets and blah blah blah, but it was mainly just about Ronnie and how they were beefing. It was a little cool because like this social media star is sitting in my old friend's car and he's telling all these secrets about all these bands that I like. I will say, however, I did pay for Social Repose's Dutch Bros and he technically still owes me $4, so please sir. He also totally talked shit about like his little emo YouTuber group, like Johnny Gilbert, Brian Stars, a whole bunch of other. They were going hiking at the time. This was in like March 2020, like right before quarantine happened. So do with that what you will. He like asked me who my favorite of the group was and I was like, oh, it's Johnny Gilbert, like because he was closest to my age and like I was obsessed with him during my scene phase. Glad to see he's still going strong in that. But he was just talking about it and he was like, he would never like you. And I was like, okay, don't want to do that, but like, sure. Oh my god, totally remembered that we were fighting. Like, me and Social Repose were like screaming at each other, like fighting. And I told him I was gonna make an exposing video about him and he literally panicked. And like, I meant it as a joke, but like, here we are.
She followed this up by telling more personal anecdotes about Social Repose, of which Johnny Gilbert was in the discussion of, and he ended up coming in to confirm this girl's story, adding some credibility to it. And then Social Repose responded to it by saying the following. Now, this is all probably really confusing, and we'll break it all down later, but by now I had produced questions that Carla needed to answer for me, and so I asked away. First off, let me clarify what Carla had said about Richie, right? Richie had never asked for anything provocative or photos. I looked at the entire conversation log. At the time of this happening, Richie was about 23. He responded and admitted as much, saying the following. Him claiming to have stopped is wrong though. After learning her age, he continued to speak to her for a long time. The point of her age even came up later in the conversation after this happening. He says how he and Carla can be adorable together, and then later on says the following. You're so cute though. Stop being 16, okay? Social Repose allegedly in these conversations claims to be in PR later, assumedly Puerto Rico, but agreed at least in the moment to have allegedly given his phone number over. Even later on continually calls her babe. He continues to offer to hang out, and the context of this seems to be related to a performance he was going to have. At least that's what it appears as. But young Carla says, maybe we can meet up. It would be nice seeing you again. And then, of which he responds, of course, I'd love to hang. Carla sends a text back complimenting him. Social Repose follows it up with a can't wait to see ya, it's been too long. The conversation lasted from the end of November 2014 to all the way in 2015, when it appears that he allegedly cut off contact with Carla. Other women did contact Carla in the comments section with similar stories, but due to a lack of physical evidence, I cannot rightfully report on that sort of thing. But there are others giving similar stories about Richie around the same time, with women reporting high school age. Again, this is all alleged, and I know since everyone's gonna hang on to this, please watch the rest of the video because we're gonna come back to these things. Turning back to Caitlin, this girl had reported another repeated behavior of Richie, where he would spend time with others and use that time to explain his woes and angers with past friends and lovers. Generally, these stories revolve around Richie explaining how he was wronged by a person or society at large. Friends like Johnny Gilbert have gone from friends to being enemies. Former lovers are always, regardless of events, portrayed as over-the-top villains looking to wrong Richie. Richie mentions someone dealing with substance abuse is a similar tactic he's used before to make that person look uncredible. Instead of addressing the argument of credibility, the credibility specifically of the individual is brought up. For example, it's not that Roy, an ex of his, had boundaries crossed in an open relationship. It's that she works in sex work and people in sex work aren't loyal. his argument, allegedly. Or that a person has clouded judgment because they deal with something maybe related to substance abuse. Basically saying they're unreliable, don't trust them. On my journey, I did speak to Roy because I ended up needing to cross-reference some timelines. But I'm working backwards, so before we get to Roy and all that, I just want to discuss with Jesse Page, who made a video addressing him and what he had said about her finally. And I do have old videos about that as well. In this video, Jesse addresses pretty much the more ludicrous points made by Social Repose in his faux content cop. Basically, it was a content cop around Jesse Page for being Jesse Page. There isn't much to those videos. Jesse mentions how he mocked her laugh, her job, her channel, etc. He had done this as a meta move to get back at Jacqueline, at least allegedly. Jesse, being friends with Jacqueline and being younger and unaccustomed to internet drama, didn't take it well in the time. But I and many others came to Jesse's defense because the points mentioned were non-issues, taken seriously and absolutely ridiculous. Jesse mentions in this video something I'll get back to later, but I'll just let her say it for now. Again, I want to save my opinions for the end.
Isn't for over 30-year-old man. Like, of course my content isn't going to be catered to you. A lot of my audience at that time especially were younger than me. Like, of course there's cute B-roll and ukulele music and stuff. It was very wholesome content. I'm sorry that it was cringe wholesome to you. In general, you could even argue, why is this 32-year-old man watching a teenage girl's YouTube videos about her sexuality?
Again, I don't want to tell anybody to watch my older video. It's probably not that good. Yep, Social Repose targets the friends of Jacqueline to get back at her still. I really wanted to go the whole rest of my Social Repose reporting without mentioning Jacqueline. The woman's married, living a good life, and it's years from her time with Social Repose. Unfortunately, she still has to deal with these things. Speaking of relationships, I touched base with Roy. I was put in contact with the other exes of Social Repose who haven't spoken about it publicly. Well, sort of. Roy's important because her timelines are close enough to some of these events that Roy overlaps with the other women I needed to cross-reference their testimony. This is when I was working on spirit science and most of my energy was dedicated to pretending to be a crystal-worshipping shaman and accountant from New York City. In my off time, I talked to the women to get a feeler and slowly moved from a story about magical crystals to a story about Social Repose's exes again. However, these exes ended up becoming anonymous sources later on. They had their reasons for this, unique reasons, and I learned a lot more as time passed, so I'm going to give you the abridged, alleged information of the women who don't want to be named. One of these examples of things I had to cross-reference was a fire extinguisher story, right? For example, this story happened with Roy, but I'll just let Roy say it.
And I also just want to preface that no, he hasn't hit physically any of us, but the violent tendencies are definitely there. Things that I never mentioned in my own video, which he tells this story completely differently because of course he does. But getting into his car and we got into like a minor argument over a literal slushie. I just want to point that out. Whatever. And he jerked his car around in a full flip around in the middle of the road at night and did it so hard that like I hit the side of the door. And the only funny part about this, because of course I was crying and freaking out and calling my mom. He like dumped me off back at his house and just drove off. But the karma in that was that he had a fire extinguisher in the back seat of his car that in the aggressive jerking motion fell over. And only after he dropped me off and left did it trigger and go off, and the entire thing went off in his back seat. So his car was covered in like a 2-inch layer of yellow fire dust. And yeah, that was a thing, which he later lied to the next girls about how the dust got into his like vent in his car and it made the AC stop working. And he claimed to them that it just like happened.
The other women, one named Blue and the other Green, also saw the fire extinguisher dust in the car later. He hadn't cleaned it. Blue from the outset was a lot more vocal and open and relayed a lot of details about this. I knew going in Green was a quiet person and maybe was gonna back out of being on the record. I got the feeling they had some mixed emotions about Richie, and of course Green backed out first. I understand, they wanted to live a quiet life. When I put out my Social Repose, the new Onision video, I actually heard Green's story, but I was asked to keep quiet about it in that time. Blue told me a lot more and gave me a lot of information about their relationship. Blue was an adult content creator, much like Roy, and this was a point of contention in the relationship. Richie would allegedly use this as an ultimatum, me or OnlyFans, for example. Richie would say how Blue ignored the relationship to only do OnlyFans. Richie would get annoyed because Blue wasn't providing enough pictures to him. Meanwhile, Richie was going into his office to work, where he would allegedly talk to other women. Sometimes while his partner was in the house downstairs, hanging out with the cat. If the story sounds familiar, that's because it is similar to what happened to Roy. Throughout all of this, Roy has been becoming similar to what Jacqueline had become in the past, being this somehow master manipulator. Richie allegedly discussed friends who ruined him, including Roy, being one of those that was much like Jacqueline, a master manipulator ruining his life. When in reality, all that Roy has been cooperative with sharing information and making sure that I can find reasonable testimony between these people. I say that Roy has been helpful in contacting these women because quite honestly, I don't blame people for assuming that I'm some kind of sleazy 10-minute surfing commentator like Leafy or something. But you know, once I would get in conversation with these women and I'd learn more about it, obviously everybody was more or less on the same page. Regardless, everywhere I went, other men and women mentioned anecdotes on how Social Repose can't stop talking about them, at least allegedly. Content creators like Johnny Gilbert, exes, and people who meet him in passing all say similar things. Even recently, Roy received messages where one day Richie wants to extend some kind of olive branch and the next he's exclaiming that a storm is coming. A recent message released from Carla doesn't make this discussion any easier either. Now, for my opinion on all this, because I've been really holding on to this information for a long time, and I recently got a ridiculous community guideline strike on the channel, meaning that I have 2 strikes. So if you'd like to support me on Patreon, please do, because this content is time-consuming and emotionally taxing. Regardless of how you dice it, my past with Social Repose may help or hinder this reporting. How you take it is up to you. But I've watched them work and respond to quite a lot, honestly, and I lack the edgy energy I had pre-pandemic to do this L dancing thing on him. I just can't. My life is crazy, I'm dealing with family, and I got plenty to worry about. I can only hazard a guess, but I'm going to assume that he'll probably respond to this, considering that I've addressed some things that he probably doesn't want people to hear about. Next, I think some of this may be used as a smoking gun by people that are less credible. Some people will take that information from Carla and assume this is the EDP moment they've been waiting for to make that video. And I don't know if that's the case. I understand why other commentators might do that. However, I just wouldn't shoot the gun too early. I do think the information is important and you hearing about it is important, but I just don't know what to think of it personally. Carla's story is interesting and quite honestly, I believe her, but I just don't know what to make of it all. Others have used the age gap relationship thing to allude to his predatory manners, and I don't think that's a very productive discussion. People keep using this with creators online that age gap relationships are equivalent to being a pedophile. Look, if you're over 18, generally it's considered legal, okay? I understand that's not the point with Carla and that conversation she had with Social Repose, but I just want to understand the parameters of the discussion because people are calling for smoke when there's really no fire. To pull another example from another controversial content creator, if they're say a 20-something and they're dating Keemstar, for example, guess what? They're not a pedophile. Yeah, at a certain point, I'd personally say it's weird, but to outright insinuate or to say something that somebody is a predator is bad faith and just stupid. Jessie Page mentions how it's creepy for a man in his 30s to watch her content about a teenager being LGBTQ. I don't know what in particular that insinuates, but it does propagate this whole narrative that, oh, it's kind of creepy, it's weird and all that stuff. And honestly, it's getting way off the point of the discussion to have. Moving back to my history, I imagine these two things will happen next. So first off, I'm imagining that I'm probably gonna get a DM from Social Repose. If not that, there's no way he isn't gonna respond, because Carla's story is pretty incredible, as well as the other exes not necessarily making him look good either, as well as former friends coming out to speak out against him. So with that being said, Richie, when you do see this video, let's set some ground rules for how this is gonna go, because I haven't made a single joke about you, so I expect the same respect. I respect that you respect the women for not giving their names, right? Don't say it. Next, despite featuring Jessie in this video and even saying something critical of her, don't spend time in the video talking about her. I don't think she needs it, and I really don't think she matters all that much. I don't like her type of content personally. I have my own reasons for that, but it doesn't make it a sexy or fun commentary video because the content is so lukewarm. Lastly, I just want to say, you know, again, I haven't made a single joke this entire video. I've kept it pretty adult, so I know you're probably not, but let's try and keep it that way. Other than that, I think everything else is pretty much fair game, so let's see what happens next, Social Repose. Please, address all these things. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'd reach out to you, however, I think you would assume that I'm going to make you look bad, but in reality, I think you're really doing that yourself. Now, without further ado, please support the channel if you can. Stuff like this is incredibly difficult to produce, and I'm using a teleprompter for the first time. So hopefully I'm not too stunted in this video, but I didn't want to veer off from my notes here because I didn't want to say something that wasn't fact-checked by myself or, you know, corroborated evidence from other things that I've experienced. With that said, guys, take care, be well, and yeah, I understand the comments are probably gonna get crazy in this one, so, you know, enjoy that.